Welcome to a special edition of the Notebook. I'm Barry Craig. The vision of our college is to be an innovative learning institution committed to empowering individuals to achieve excellence in an environment of respect. To that end, we present to you today a civil discourse on the Iraqi conflict. Our program is sponsored by the Humanities, Fine Arts, and Social Sciences Division, as well as Phi Theta Kappa, our college honorary. We thank Professor Paul Wood for blessing this program, as well as Dr. Kevin Garricky, the advisor to Phi Theta Kappa. We'd also like to thank Charles Schneider from a group called Democracy for America. It was a telephone call from Charles that got the ball rolling on this. And so, leading our civil discourse will be two distinguished gentlemen from our community. They are Colonel Don Askew, United States Army retired, and Kevin Murphy of Patriots for Peace. Colonel Askew is a combat veteran of Vietnam, where he served with the Special Forces, popularly known as the Green Berets. He is an authority on the Middle East, where he has spent considerable time. He was an advisor to Presidents Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. Colonel Askew was also one of the Pentagon planners for the 1991 Gulf War. He is our neighbor who lives across the river in Massac County, Illinois. Welcome.
Thank you, Barry.
Our other distinguished panelist is Mr. Kevin Murphy, who is retired from the Centers for Disease Control, headquartered in Atlanta, but his job took him all over the world. He has opposed the conflict in Iraq. He told me before it even got started. He regularly participates in peaceful anti-war vigils in Paducah. He lives in Livingston County, near the town of Tylene. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We're going to begin with brief opening statements from each of our distinguished panelists of about 5 minutes each, and then we're going to open the program up for questions. Remember, the only stupid question is the question that wasn't asked. Now, to give our guests ample time to ask questions of our panelists, we have, acting as timekeeper, Professor Gerald Watkins, also Commissioner Gerald Watkins. Professor Watkins told me he is going to hold our panelists to 5 minutes, and I must warn you, gentlemen, he is a black belt in karate, so let's try to stay within our limits. Colonel Askew, begin.
All right, Barry, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today with this astute group and participate in this symposium. Incidentally, I feel morally obligated to define
Please
symposium.
Do.
Symposium is a word from the Greek, and basically, literally translated, it means ugly, wild brawl. Actually, drunken, wild brawl. So let's hope that we don't do that here today, but anyway, just for the fun of it, that's exactly what it means. Of course, I'm a military man, and I view the world's problems in light of 30 years plus experience in that arena. Let me tell you right at the outset, however, that nobody hates war worse than the military man who has to go fight it. It is my t-shirt that they're trying to ruin out there with their RPGs and their bullets, and we take a very dim view of that. So it's always been my position and the position of every other professional soldier that I know that war is a tool that should only be used as a last resort. And my views probably will be couched in those terms. But we're talking here today about the Middle East or Southwest Asia, and it depends on who you're talking to. The intelligence community generally refers to this part of the world as Southwest Asia. The socio-political academic community generally refers to it as the Middle East. So here we have a basic problem right off the bat that we don't even know how to define it. So we gives you some idea of the problems that we have here in dealing with this part of the world. One thing I wanted to make clear to you, at least in my part of the opening statement, is the definitions of some of these factors and some of the agents that we play. We hear about the Sunni and the Shia and the secular civil war and Islam and terrorism and roles of these things. Most people that I have talked to have problems really understanding the differences and understanding part of the problems of what's going on in Iraq right now is an extremely difficult and complex thing to do. It's a complicated part of the world. It's a culture that is essentially as different from ours as night and day. And when we impose our value systems and our judgments and our perceptions of that part of the world, oftentimes we don't know really what we're talking about. This has been defined by any number of well-meaning people as a religious war, or terrorism, and Osama bin Laden and the bad guys have been attempted to be portrayed as instruments of Satan. This is simply not true. I used the analogy in talking to people that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, for example, have the same relationship to the religion of Islam as the Ku Klux Klan has to the relationship to Christianity. I mean, it's not a civil war with regard to religion. It is a civil war with regard to international power and positions and controls. So think about that a bit. When you receive letters knocking Islam or knocking the Muslims' role, think a little bit about whether or not you're getting a good picture, or whether or not your picture is being presented to you by someone who has a different agenda than you might have. And there's a lot of that going on. Sunnis. What is a Sunni? Well, a Sunni is simply a sect or a division of the religion of Islam and its followers, the Sunni followers. It's the largest division of Islam. And Sunni followers simply believe in the traditions of the religion and the Old Testament and so forth as laid out by Muhammad. And they believe that the first four caliphs that were appointed following Muhammad's death are the rightful inheritors of the role of Muhammad, the rightful leaders following the death of Muhammad. They believe in the old traditions. In fact, that's what the word means. It means lawful rule and custom, the Sunni. The Shia, on the other hand, or the Shiites, or the Shia, is a smaller faction. And it tends to believe that Muhammad's cousin, Ali, is the rightful inheritor of the role of Muhammad. And the difference obviously springs from that. And like most secular differences, has spread over the years and to become a chasm between the two. The other group that you hear now talked about a lot are the Kurds. The Kurds is simply another totally different ethnic group. They're more closely related to the people of Turkey and the southwestern part of Asia than they are the people of Iraq and Iran. They are a group that considers themselves separate as an ethnic group. They have for years attempted to form their own country with their own leadership, following their own rules of their own culture. Turkey does not want to allow them into Turkey because obviously that's a piece of territory they'd have to give up. Similarly speaking, they're picked on by the people of Iran because, again, they are a separate and distinct group. And everybody knows that sooner or later you've got to have a separate and distinct group to pick on. So anyway, those people are there. They compound the problem. Iraq itself as a country is a part of the old Babylonian Empire. You know, you remember the Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar and all those good guys and the Hanging Gardens and Abraham from Ur and the Tigris and the Euphrates River. It's a traditional site of the Garden of Eden. In fact, if you go down there, used to, when I was there the first time, you went down to where the Tigris and the Euphrates came together, and there was a two-story mud brick hotel down there called the Garden of Eden Inn. And if you stayed there overnight and gave enough attention and a little loose bakshish to the people who ran the place, they would take you out back and show you this old gnarled tree. And the old gnarled tree was purported to be the tree that Eve ate in the Garden of Eden and got us all in trouble. But anyway, Saddam Hussein, incidentally, had that tree taken down and replaced by metal sculpture, and the tree was taken itself bodily up to one of the museums in Baghdad, and I have no idea where it is now, but it's an area that's rich in tradition. It's also an area that is almost impossible to make a democratic republic, representative democracy out of. The country of Iraq was established by the British colonialists many years ago. Based on the way they did things, they said, okay, there's a river here and a lake there and a big rock over here, let's make a boundary and make a nation. And they did that without regard to the fact that within that, what's now the territorial boundaries of Iraq, you have two branches of the major religion of Islam. You have at least 3, possibly 4 separate ethnic groups. You have Sunni, Shia, you have Kurds. Down to the south, you have another group called Marsh Arabs, which are totally different from any of the others. And they've all hated each other since Abraham wandered through there. You know, it's not going to be a finger-snapping deal to make a representative democracy out of this. And yet, sometimes we try to do that. We think that what's good for General Bull Moose is good for the nation, and it's not always the case. I've worked with a lot of developing nations, countries. Everybody wants to be a democracy, and everybody wants it to happen overnight. And it's just not going to happen. Since World War II, we've had 40 different attempts at establishing representative democracies around the country, and constitutional democracy, and only 10 of them have even become remotely successful. It is a very complicated part of attempting to define a government. We've been trying to do this in our country now for almost, 225 years. We haven't got it right yet. So the idea that a diverse nation with diverse cultural groups and ethnic groups is going to somehow rather be magically transformed by anybody under anything is really rather fallacious. So we have some problems simply understanding the culture and the history and the nature of the people that we're dealing with here in Iraq. I don't know how much diversity we're going to have in our positions here, because my position, quite honestly, on this is that war is something that we should not use casually. General Robert E. Lee made the comment that it is good that war is terrible, otherwise we would become too fond of it. We have a statement that we used to, as war planners, use a lot, and that's it. If the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem begins to look like a nail after a while. And this is not the kind of problem in Iraq right now that we're going to resolve using military force alone. So, pragmatically, my view is this: we probably should never have gone in there in the first place, but that's also irrelevant. We are there, and we have to deal with the hand that's given to us. Now, the question is how do we do that? And that's not an easy solution, and it's certainly not going to be handled with a flip of the wrist. And we need bright brains, such as the group that's in here right now, to be able to think outside the box, think differently, think knowingly, think with knowledge and logic, and a level of emotion, and come up with some sort of a solution. This is a new thing that we're facing. The war does not go away, it simply changes its face. And therein lies the challenge, and that's the challenge that faces you. Okay?
Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. Listening to Colonel Askew, I'm reminded of Faulkner's quote, where he said in a totally different context, speaking of the American South, he said, "The past is not dead. It's not even the past."
That's right.
The long-term effects of the culture that we're dealing with over there, that is hopelessly misunderstood by our government, I'm afraid, will be what determines how this plays out. We're in the Act 2 of a 3-act tragedy, and we don't know yet what the solution will be. And I agree that there are 3 gray-haired men up here hoping that you guys will come up with a good solution. And I think there's a growing consensus that the war in Iraq was a mistake. The view of the war results from a large body of evidence that the war was ill-conceived and totally unnecessary. The U.S. government has vigorously resisted telling the American people the truth about this war. The truth that has shifted American public opinion is indisputable. And the truth is that the war was based on what was at best flawed intelligence and at worst outright lies and hyped up propaganda. Think WMD, for example. The truth is that the war was poorly planned and poorly executed. And you need look no further than Walter Reed or your local VA hospital to realize this. The truth is that the war was not in the best interest of the United States, and that launching the war has played into the hands of political and religious extremists in the United States and in Islamic extremists worldwide. I'll spare you my usual doctrinaire leftist rhetoric that says that most wars are all about economics. I think that's a given, and that they're fought by poor young people who fight them for the benefit of rich old people and even richer corporations. There's no person in this room who isn't familiar with the obscene profits from no-bid contracts that have been made by the Halliburton Corporation as a result of this war. You probably already know that the United States spends more of its national wealth on its military than all the other countries of the world combined. Combined. In the interest of total disclosure, let me tell you that while Don was in Vietnam doing his duty, fighting and getting shot at, I was married and had 2 children, and I had a gassed-up VW pointed toward Canada. I was totally against that war also. And you need to know that, because that's where I'm coming from. What's less known about the economy of this war is that the Coalition Provisional Authority under Paul Bremer, talk about overnight democracy, had taken the unified Iraqi socialist economy planned by the state and tried overnight to turn it into a dreamland of privatized capitalist statism. It was a never-never land for the corporate vultures to pick at the bones of a destroyed country. A 15% flat tax. Flat tax, as unfair as you can get, as Tom Barlow will be able to tell it, was imposed, which hurts the little guy, the guy who's now RPGing us. The de-Baathification of the country led to a group of unemployed, intelligent people who are now fighting us. Civil servants were fired. Now, these are the dreams of a Republican administration. If you can de-unionize the place, impose a flat tax that will let the rich guys get off, and have all the civil servants either fired or non-unionized, you've got a Republican administration. You may have heard the question that's so often asked: why, of all the museums, all the public buildings, all the government ministries, why was the oil ministry the only one protected by our troops and the only one unlooted in the riots that followed the fall of Baghdad? Finally, I think that the new consensus gains momentum from the recognition that the executive branch of the United States government has used this war and the war on terror generally to seriously erode American civil liberties. Excesses in this regard are not new. They've happened in our previous wars. To list 2, you might think of World War I, when the Palmer raids that followed the war were a result of the effort to destroy the labor union movement in the United States. Thousands of people were detained illegally, jailed, abused, and deported. During World War II, we saw the mass displacement and detention in internal concentration camps of our fellow citizens who were of Japanese ancestry. This was a blatant display of good old American racism. But this war is different. This war is an attack on us all. Who would have dreamed in the year 2000 that in the year 2006 our Congress would be asked to rubber stamp an executive decision to use torture and detention without trial on persons detained in secret prisons? Who would have dreamed in the year 2000 that the government of the United States would gain the right to review your library records, your medical records, or that the executive branch would arrogate to itself, unconstitutionally and in direct violation of standing law, the right to read your mail and listen in on your telephone calls. These are our freedoms. They would like you to believe that our freedoms are our weaknesses. This is not true. Our freedoms are our strengths. And this is why we will ultimately prevail in this so-called war on terror. Without them, the freedoms, we will inevitably and by definition lose the war. There are many issues we can discuss today. We can debate pre-war intelligence and WMD, or we can debate al-Qaeda connections to Iraq until we're sick of it. We can debate the inadequacy of preparations for the war, or planning for the care of the returned wounded, until we cry from shame. We can discuss the impact on the decision to go to war of our domestic Israel lobby, a perfectly legal group of lobbyists and pundits who strongly advocate the position of the Israeli government on issues relative to the Middle East. We could discuss who gains the most from this war. Is it Iran, which has gained dramatically as a regional power as a result of this war? Is it Israel, whose defense commitment from our government has become total as a result of this war? Look at the decision of our government to do nothing while the Israeli government destroyed Lebanon. Or is it al-Qaeda that gains, for whom this war has provided a training and recruitment platform that Osama bin Laden would never have thought possible, even in his weirdest dreams? One thing I think we can all agree on is that the major gainer from this war has not been the United States of America. The overriding issue that we truly need to discuss, and I agree totally with Don, we need to discuss urgently, is how to extricate ourselves from this huge and growing blunder. We need to decide how to leave Iraq, if we can, to minimize further damage to the Iraqis. We need to decide how to leave Iraq while trying to minimize further American deaths and the horrendous injuries caused by this benighted endeavor. We need urgently to decide how to leave Iraq while attempting to minimize a further reduction in our national prestige abroad and to minimize further disunity and further loss of our liberty at home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. And now it is time for you to ask questions. If you would step to the microphone one by one, state your name and your question.
My name is Cindy Lidecker, and Colonel Askew, you touched on this a bit when you began. However, how can any country's army win a war against a group of Islamic extremists who have been steeped in thousands of years of religion that teaches them that it will bring honor to their families and a place in heaven for themselves if they use the tactic of suicide bombing in order to destroy their enemies? You know, we know that true learning manifests itself with change. Until we change their thinking, we will never put an end to their terrorist activities. And I ask you, how do we do that, sir?
Well, first of all, there's some doubt in my mind that that is, in fact, directly out of the Quran. Oftentimes, much like in our own look at religion, we tend to interpret things according to the way we want to interpret them and how they fit our background. I've lived with Muslims. I have worshiped as a Christian with them quite easily and quite calmly and patiently. I have fought with them, alongside them, and against them both. I have eaten with them, broke bread with them, married, been to their weddings, been to their funerals. I was very fortunate to be able to be assimilated into a culture that is in fact totally different. And once you do that, you find that a lot of the old stereotypical ideas about Islam, what it's about and what it teaches and what its values are, quite simply aren't true. You can search the Quran till the netherworld freezes over solid, and you'll never find anything that says women are subservient to men and must remain veiled. And by the same token, you'll find the infidel, which is spoken of in great disdain in the Quran. And this is where you find a lot of our ideas that Islam is a religion of violence, because they have little truck to do with the infidel. And the problem that we haven't come to grips with yet is that we ain't the infidel. The infidel is defined in Islam as an individual who does not believe in God, not a person who believes in the God of our God. God, Jehovah or Yahweh, the God we worship as Christians, is the same God they worship. They just call him Ali. You know, some of you guys call me Don. Some of you call me Colonel Askew. Some of you say, hey, you. But we're all talking about the same person. The difference in the religion doesn't become an issue until one reaches the divinity of Christ. And then we separate as to how we believe and what we believe in. But essentially, they believe the same thing as we do up to that point. But whenever they talk to rewards in heaven and that sort of thing, and they certainly there's nothing in the Quran that I've been able to find that deals with explosives and killing yourself and all this. There's a reason why they do that, but it doesn't have anything to do with religion. However, religion is a tremendous, powerful part of their culture. And a person who wants to do so can take an individual who is not very well positioned in life, who is not well educated, who is easily manipulated by someone for a cause, and can turn him into a patriot. And that's very easy to do. We do it here in this country. You don't have to go back too very far. General George Patton made the comment, and you hear about, let's go out and die for our country. You know, we've all said that. We'll go die for our country. Hey, you don't win wars by dying for your country. General George Patton put it very succinctly. You win wars by letting the other guy die for his country. You know, and the reason people use bombs and explosions and suicide bombing is because, quite honestly, that's all they have left. The playing field in the Middle East is a long way from being level. And we're part of that problem. And you alluded to a good portion of that reason. But anyway, hopefully I probably haven't answered your question. It's not an easy question to answer.
No, it isn't.
But I would simply suggest that what we all need to do is take some time and find out about the religion, think ourselves about what motivates these people to do these things. You know, and maybe it'll become a little bit clearer to us. And maybe we won't be vulnerable to somebody else's propaganda.
I'd just like to put in the perspective of that a little history. If you remember the history of World War II, the image of a Japanese soldier, some of the most courageous soldiers who ever lived, was a buck-toothed guy, a Shinto practitioner who wanted to just get to the West Coast and start violating American women and ripping off the United States. It's part of the propaganda game. This is what the politicians give you when they want you to go to war. So I think we need to put the religious aspect of it in perspective. And here's a guy who's lived and worked with Muslims for many years, and his take on the Quran and Islam is totally different than what you get out of the politicians of the United States.
Let's have another question.
My name is Loretta McDermott, and more important, my son's name is Army Specialist Gentry Derek M. He is with the Het Company stationed presently in Camp Taji, Iraq. And my question to you is, how has this war in Iraq made life better for people in Iraq or in the United States? As of March 8th, 2007, we have lost 3,532 soldiers. This is men and women. These are our fathers, mothers, our daughters, our sons, and our brothers and sisters. There has been 23,677 wounded as of March 8th. And this is not counting the ones that are coming home with depression, that are post-traumatic stress disorders. These are not in that number. Thank you.
Are you asking?
Can I take that? I would like to compliment you first.
Should either.
Your son is obviously doing what he's signed on to do. And I hope that, and I'm sure, as I'm sure you do, that he returns safely and soon. How this helped the United States is very difficult to see. I can see no upside of this. How it helped Iraq, you might say that Saddam Hussein is not there anymore. But you've replaced the devil you knew and the devil we dealt with for many, many decades with the devil you don't know. And that's always a loser, too. So I hope that maybe Don could find an upside to this, but the deposing of Saddam Hussein, I think, is about the only one that I can think of.
I would concur with that, quite honestly. The world as a whole is a better place. Certainly the Iraqis are better off without Saddam Hussein in a position of authority. The world is better off. This was a man who was truly almost a psychotic loose cannon. But in so doing, in so replacing Saddam Hussein, the way we did, we have set up a set of conditions that have created a secular civil war. And obviously we're all worse off. My son, is just retired after his third tour of duty in Iraq. It's interesting, the media says that the soldiers, they all believe in staying there and finishing the job. And by and large, it's been my experience that this is true on your first tour of duty there. When you have a second and third tour of duty there, it begins to get a little old. It doesn't take any time at all to realize that war is not like John Wayne puts it up on the movie screen. The first time that first bullet goes whipping past your ear, believe me, it loses its thrill. The feeling of adventure and a great crusade is really no longer there. Now, having said that, I believe that we have done a number of really, truly good things for the people of Iraq. But they've been done by the American GI pretty much on his own. You've got an awful lot of little kids in Iraq that are playing soccer again on a field that was put together by an engineer company just because these people are just good, decent American people. We are a good, decent American people. I believe that. I'm a Pollyanna in that sense of the word. There's more of the good guys than there are the bad guys. Bad guys just make more noise than the good guys do. We've built hospitals there. We've rebuilt buildings. We've made friends with the ordinary people. You just don't see that. And the successes that we've had there are a tremendous tribute to young men like your son, who have gone over and done the job that they were ordered to do, but they've done more than that. They've spread democracy through the way they act, the way they believe, the way they feel, and that changes people's lives. Someone once said that only twice in the history of the world have people voluntarily given their lives for a cause. One was Jesus Christ, who died for your salvation. The other was the American GI, who died for your freedom. And that's what we're about. And that's the image that we leave. And in that sense of the word, yeah, there's good done. There's small sparks of it. They're done by the private. They're done by the doctor who treats the Iraqi. They're done by the individual who lay there in the hospital and said to a newsman the other night, the newsman asked this young man, how do you feel when you see your blood supplies being given to a wounded enemy soldier? And the young man looked at him and said, sir, it doesn't make any difference. Human being's a human being. Which I thought was an excellent, excellent, excellent answer. So in that sense of the word, one-on-one at the low level, we're doing good and we're changing perceptions. But at the higher level, it's not so good. But I will salute the young men and women below battalion level, if you will, till my arms fall off. Been there, done that. They are excellent. They are superb. And we should be extremely proud of them. But you can indeed support the war, support the troops and not support the war.
Next question.
My name is Lynn Hobbs, and I have a two-part question for Colonel Askew. The British had said that they are pulling out. Do you think this is because they think the Iraqi troops are trained well enough, or because they think this is a hopeless cause? And also, who exactly is it that decides when the troops are trained well enough to leave?
Well, to answer your second question, there are criteria that are laid out in military regulations and rules that say there are certain tasks that troops must be proficient in. There are certain levels of equipment that they must have. There are certain levels of equipment and training on that equipment and supplies that they must have before they can consider to be ready. I mean, you can't take a young man and just haul him in off the street and say, okay, you salute like that, now you're a soldier. I mean, there are standards that are set forth in what amounts to law that has to be met before a troop can be deployed. And sometimes these aren't quite met, to be honest with you. Sometimes some of these things are fudged. And that's wrong, and that shouldn't happen. But unfortunately, life being what it is, it does. I find it terribly disturbing that we have casualty in war from combat is bad enough. A casualty in war from an accident that could have been corrected maybe by better training. Or we should have had the equipment that was better prepared for the kind of war that we're fighting. Those are things that just sometimes fall through the crack. But there are standards, and those standards are set up in law to determine when a person is considered to be ready. The first part of your question dealt primarily with the British. I rather imagine that it's a political issue. It's a hot point with Parliament. Tony Blair is the Prime Minister. He is under a lot of heat from the British constituency to bring those troops home, to get them back to what they feel the British Parliament and representing the British people feel is something that they've done their duty, they've met their requirement, and now it's time to go home. I rather doubt that they feel that it is winnable. I don't think that certainly I don't see how anybody could think that the Iraqi military and police forces are anywhere close to being able to handle their own security. So I would suggest it's a political issue within Britain, the politics of Britain itself.
I think that Britain also recognizes the area of their responsibility was in the south of the country, with Basra, which is the hub of Shiite Islam and of Iranian influence. I think they've looked at it and they realize that Iran has won that area of Iraq. It's over. And there's no reason getting any more people killed over there.
Yeah, I think it's
They have moved some troops to Afghanistan, which is the real war. I mean, it's the war that we lost track of somewhere in the neoconservative push to topple Saddam Hussein. And I think the British just realized that and decided that we're sending good money after bad.
If I may make an addendum to that statement along the lines of what you're talking about. You know, this whole thing started because we were after Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. We've lost track of Osama bin Laden. We've lost sight of the objective. Osama bin Laden is probably alive and well, and I would guess somewhere in Pakistan, Afghanistan border. But Al-Qaeda is gaining in strength. Our failed and stalled efforts have created an excellent recruiting base for Osama bin Laden's expansion of Al-Qaeda. The Taliban in Afghanistan is in a very, very strong resurgent position right now. You know, so what happened to our original goal to go get Osama bin Laden? You know, it's somehow been overshadowed by this. Well, I don't know. Let's go get Saddam. You know, we've lost track of who the bad guys really were, and we need to refocus on that thing and maybe take a harder look at where we really should be fighting, and who we should and how we should.
And as far as the readiness ratings go, I was speaking to a retired officer the other day, and there are 5 ratings. You can go from C1 to C5, 1 being fully trained, ready, equipped, and ready to go. I would doubt that any of the Iraqi troops would, well, maybe a few, would fall into the C1 category. Our question as Americans is, how many of the people that we're sending over there fall? Where do they fall in the C ratings? Are we sending poorly trained, poorly equipped people into what Nancy Pelosi refers to as the meat grinder of Iraq? Or are we sending fully trained people who are capable of defending themselves? And that's a real question that one of Congressman Murtha's suggestions was that we don't send anyone unless they're fully qualified, fully ready, fully trained, fully equipped. And that seems to be scoffed at by the same people who said that this war would cost us about $4 billion and the rest, Iraqi oil money would pay for the rest of it. It's just they're disguising, sending our guys and girls into an area where without the proper training and equipment.
We tend to train for the last war, not the next one. And we need to somehow or other review our thinking and start looking at war as it is going to be or as it is likely to be, and not retraining ourselves to refight World War II all over again or Vietnam all over again. There are some serious philosophical issues that need to be discussed at the highest level before we commit our troops. I don't know that we've ever sent very many troops into a position at a real honest-to-goodness C1 readiness later. C1 readiness means that you have all the people that you're authorized to have, that you have all the training that they are all individually and as a unit authorized to have, with every piece of equipment that they are authorized to have. That means that the 101st Airborne or Air Assault Division at Fort Campbell, in order to go to war at C1, would have to deploy with a grand piano, because a grand piano is a piece of equipment that is authorized for it to have in its band. And if you don't have that grand piano, you can't be C1.
They probably would have made more friends if they'd have taken the grand piano.
Probably. Depends on who's playing. So, you know, it's not very likely that we have. But it is a criminal act when Congress refuses to fund the money that the military needs to provide protective individual vests for our soldiers. And when it fails to provide the money to provide armament, proper armament for Humvees or Bradley fighting vehicles or whatever it might be. We were talking earlier, the reference was made to Walter Reed. Certainly the commander of Walter Reed should have been dismissed, and he was, and others should be also as a result of the buck stopping here syndrome. But while Congress is stripping people from stars and eagles, they need to take a hard look at their own actions whenever they fail to fund the operation and maintenance for the Army Fund that was requested by the Army to repair Walter Reed Hospital's deficiencies. The decision was made by the Secretary of Defense over 5 years ago that eventually we would just do away with Walter Reed, that we would have one joint service hospital in that region, and that would be Bethesda. And so therefore Congress, in its infinite wisdom, said, oh, why should we give any money to Walter Reed? And so they did not, and that money went to to whatever cause Congressman whoever decided that he wanted to use it. So he took a fact-finding trip to Costa Rica, and whenever the walls began to fall in at Walter Reed, blamed the commanding officer of Walter Reed. There's some merit to that, but there's also the old thing about let's not be too quick to stone, until we take a hard look at our own responsibilities with regard to that. And I don't see very much of that going on.
I spoke of preparedness for the war a little earlier on, and the Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense, made the famous statement that you go to war with the army that you have, not with the army that you want. And you bring the wounded home. Murphy's corollary to that is that you bring the wounded home to the military medical system that you have, not the military medical system that they deserve.
Yeah.
This young lady has been waiting patiently to ask a question.
Hey,
Sorry
you've
about
calmed my
that.
nerves, so that's a good thing.
Go right ahead.
I actually have a couple of questions and a remark. My question is, you were talking about the good things that happened over there. So my question is, why doesn't the media ever talk about the good things that happen over there and show the good things that have happened over there? Because that would both calm our attitudes over here and help the wounded and our soldiers and help them with their post-traumatic stress, because all they're seeing on TV are the bad things. And so they're recapping that in their mind. And they're having bad feelings because they're having feelings that they're abandoning their fellow soldiers because they're home. And they're also recapping what they experienced over there. They're not being able to see in their mind the good things that they did over there because they're not seeing it on the TV. And then you were talking about God, and I believe that's the most important factor, because you were talking about all the lies, because we shouldn't have been in this war in the first place, and that may be so. But the lies started with our own government, and the lies, I believe, started with our own government because God was taken out of our government. God is not allowed in our government anymore. God is not allowed in our schools. My children aren't allowed to pray. My children aren't allowed to see the 10 Commandments on the wall. 25 years ago, you didn't see kids killing kids in our schools. Bring back my God in my schools. Bring back my God in my government. Bring back my God in these wars and see my country shine.
Comments?
I'll comment on the God portion of it. The framers of the Constitution dealt largely with the use of public money. Public money is money that's received from taxes or tariffs from the population in general. You're clearly a very religious person. I'm not. My money that I pay in taxes should not go to support religious education in school. Your money may go. You have the option of sending your child to any school you want. But the framers intentionally left out any establishment of religion from being a recipient of taxes, of tax money, of public law in the United States. And that's simply why, that's the plain and simple reason that God and religion is not taught in school.
Well, I am a religious person, and I can assure you it's been my experience that there are very few atheists in foxholes. And I can also assure you that as long as we give final exams in our schools, you will always have prayer there. And if somebody came and told me that they would not want to put the 10 Commandments in the high school, I would say that's really a shame, because I think the 10 Commandments really have a place in the high school. But on the other hand, I have lived in a theocratic form of government. And trust me, there is no worse form of government in this world than a theocracy. So therefore, my relationship with God is a personal thing to me. If I want to see the Ten Commandments displayed, I will write them on a sign and stick it in my front yard and dare anybody to come by and take it down. So I think it's my right to believe what I want to believe, when I want to believe it, and to display that faith however I choose to do it, and whatever works best between me and God. And I think you have the same right. And if you choose not to worship God, then that's fine. That's between you and the Almighty. I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not going to try to convert you one way or the other than to tell you what works for me. But I can assure you, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that not only have I prayed many, many, many times on the battlefield, but most all the people that I ever had anything to do with get very close to God very quick, and it's very real. This is not a theoretical piece of theological theory that one is working with. This is oh boy, God. You know, I've never prayed in 13th century English in my life. You know, and thee and thou and those and holy. You know, I'm sitting there in the door saying, Lord, this has got to be some sort of a test. There's a whole bunch of people standing down there on that ground 1,600 feet below me that are trying to kill me, and you're going to have to help me get out of this thing one way or the other. Or I got a whole bunch of folks back here that depend on me to make the right decisions. I can't do it by myself, so you're going to have to somehow work your will in my mind to help me do what has to be done to get us in and out of this thing alive. It's a very real religion. It's a very personal religion. And that's just the way I see it. And most of the people I know feel it kind of the same way.
I think there's the flip side of that coin is that Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda folks in Iraq are worshiping God also.
Yeah.
And we need to get the perspective on this. This war has a lot of what would you call it? A lot of air of holiness. President Bush referred to it as a crusade, a terrible mistake, linguistically. Bin Laden and his followers believe that they're worshiping God. They went to religious schools where religion is taught in the madrasas. And we need to get the religion and the overpinnings of religion out of this. Let's talk about how we can get our guys and our women home without getting any more of them killed.
Like I said earlier, this is not a religious issue. This is a power issue. And we need to get off, I agree, we need to get off of the religious connotation because that's not there. Osama bin Laden has a vested interest in seeing that the world repolarizes along Islamic and non-Islamic lines. And we can't let that happen, and we certainly don't want to do his job for him.
We're rapidly running out of time. Why don't we do this? Quick questions, quick answers.
Okay.
You're up.
All right. I went to St. Mary High School. My name's Lizzie Myers. And I was raised as a Catholic, but I'm now an atheist. This is my quick question. All right. I think that our problems in this war are largely due to our view of religion, that we think that, I don't know how to explain it. Whatever. Okay.
Quick question now.
All right. How in the world can we win this war without thinking about their religion, without, taking a secular approach to this? Is if we take a Christian approach to this, we're just going to do it all wrong.
Quick answer.
You're not going to win this war.
I think that's correct, too. The war is fundamentally, you can't talk about the Middle East without talking about two things, Israel and oil. And the war is essentially about those two things.
Yeah.
And we're not going to solve either one of those with peak oil and Israeli influence in the United States. So I think it's unwinnable.
Possibly a war is a bad term to describe what we're in. This is not a chess piece type situation where you have a capital or something you can go capture. We're fighting an ideological war, and that's different.
Quick question.
Yes, sir. Lately, there's been much public support to pull the troops from Iraq. Many of these supporters state soldiers' deaths as a main reason to withdraw. However, all of our military branches are comprised solely of volunteers, so if they're fine with completing their job and leaving Iraq only after it is stable, Why should we be in opposition of that?
Quick answer.
I think the General Pace the other day said that this war won't be ended until we have a political solution. Soldiers don't make policy. Soldiers are not politicians. Soldiers are hired to kill people.
And
That's
you
what
don't
they
win
do.
wars with political solutions. A war like this has to have a definitive victor. Otherwise, it simply changes its pace and continues on.
Next question.
What have some goals been set up for the war, and have any of them been accomplished?
I honestly don't know what the goals are.
Well,
I know what the goals were in Desert Storm because we helped make them. But I didn't see any of that type of planning that went into this operation.
regime change was one of the goals, and that has been accomplished. Unfortunately, what's replaced the old regime is uncertainty and chaos. Other than that, you can't get electricity in Baghdad. You can't get, there's no more oil coming out of there that you can depend on. And so I think there haven't been any accomplishments whatsoever.
We have 2 minutes left. Very fast question, very fast answer.
How do we expect to win a war with the tactics we've been using, such as torture in little camps that we are just now finding out about, while our president is going around saying that America will export violence and death to all four corners of the world to benefit America in the war? How
Did
is
he
that going
actually
to win?
say that?
I don't know where that came from.
No,
I've
that's,
never heard that
I
one.
mean, that might be the effect
Yeah.
of this trying to spread democracy by force. Democracy doesn't spread by force.
Yeah.
We talked about this before the show started. Democracy spreads by people seeing it, by seeing our troops, how they act, how they treat people. And we're not going to spread democracy into Iraq by shooting people. That's absolutely certain. I agree with you. I think we need a regime change in the United States.
We have 1 minute left. Another quick question and an extra quick answer.
I saw just last night that the Democrats are pushing for a complete withdrawal by fall 2008, and I'd like to know how each of you all feel that will wrap this up with.
I don't think that'll work.
My solution to that would be to rent as many airplanes as you can, protect the approaches to the runway, bring the airplanes in, load them up with troops, and bring the troops home.
Regrettably, and I mean that sincerely, we're out of time. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Excellent questions, excellent panelists. I bet if you wanted to hang around a few minutes afterwards, our guests would be glad to talk to you. I'm Barry Craig. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.